It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. Everybody is talking about tariffs. Literally everyone I talk to, it's been the total focus of individuals, the media. The stock markets, of course, have gone into extreme volatility. This is something that I've predicted for quite some time on this show, so it's no surprise. We're seeing upwards of 9% moves just in a day, both ways. We're going to discuss some more about tariffs and the updates and what's going on. But before I go there, there's something that's very quietly happening that no one is paying attention to, yet recently it was the focus of our attention, and that happens to be inflation. It's interesting because the U.S. consumer prices declined in March of 2025, and core inflation has actually hit a 4-year low. The overall inflation rate, according to the government, for the month of March was 2.4%. Now, as this article states, this is a steeper decline than what was predicted. But again, if you were paying attention, it probably should not be a surprise. The biggest drop in consumer prices was energy, which dropped over 3% just in the month of March. Now, energy is one of the biggest contributors to inflation. Energy costs affect the price of nearly everything because nearly everything is shipped. So it's really no surprise if energy prices go down, you're going to see a reduction of inflation. Also, one of the reasons why we're seeing such a reduction so quickly is there's been a pause in a lot of government spending due to the Trump administration and DOJ's efforts to reduce waste and fraud. So frankly, it's really not a surprise at all to me that inflation is swiftly dropping. Now, it's still slightly higher than the target rate of 2% the Federal Reserve states, but it's now getting close to that target rate. Again, much of it because of the Trump administration's efforts in drill baby drill, lowering energy prices, and reducing government spending, which are the two major drivers of inflation. This is all very, very good news for the average American. That is why I find it interesting that the legacy media has been on this crusade to gaslight, even fearmonger sometimes, Americans. And one of their big topics is telling Americans that tariffs might cause their car prices to go up about $6,000. Now, again, they have no way of knowing that to be a fact or not. No one really knows what the tariff rates are going to be going forward, although we have some more clarity on that. But it's just pure speculation at this point. Yet, the same legacy media very quietly or never even mentioned the fact that car prices actually went up about $8,000 during the Biden administration. That was real inflation that happened. Now, how did we get here? A lot of people are asking that question. You see, the promise of globalism was that we would all become fabulously wealthy together. We would go forward together as one people, no borders, nations, any of that, for the illusion of free trade. The problem with that, of course, is the price of entry was selling out our sovereignty. And many of the other countries did not play by the rules. And the American people never voted for this. It was foisted upon them by a group of elites in business, government, culture. Many of them no longer thought of themselves as Americans at all. They thought themselves as citizens of the world, really with no loyalty to any nation. But the problem is the founding of our country, the founding principle of independence is what drove the founding generation to revolution. But a country that can't make its own stuff really is not independent. The United States was the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. We won World War II primarily because of our manufacturing prowess We were able to produce more weapons of war, tanks, ships, guns, ammunition, etc. So much so that if you remember Lend Lease, where America lended weapons of war and ships and etc. to Britain to keep it afloat in fighting Nazi Germany. We also provided most of the trucks, for example, to Russia in the early years of the war and much other war material to keep them up and running and having the capability of fighting the Nazis. Eventually, our manufacturing capacity is what ultimately won the war against Germany and Japan across the world from each other at the same time. Yet today, America cannot even produce many of the things that it invented. And there's a New York Times article that came out recently stating with the United States bringing back manufacturing, it'll bring back good jobs and protect our national interests. You see, the effects of globalism is that we're no longer self-reliant. We rely on other countries for most of our essential goods, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, medical supplies, manufacturing equipment, electronics, semiconductors, nearly everything we need from fighter jets to computers. The United States currently cannot produce enough antibiotics to take care of its own citizens, for example. And there were many people, including conservatives, who were staunch supporters of the system called free trade. It sounded great. The promise was that free trade would result in fair trade policies that would be honored by all nations. And countries that had oppressive governments would become more democratic and they would join the world of free and peaceful trade relations. You see, the promise of the globalists was that free trade would result in fair trade practices across the world and honored by all nations. Well, that did not happen. Many countries, China being one of the most famous, steals IT, cheats, subverts the system. They don't play by the rules. They're famous for that. Also, free trade promises were that countries that were more oppressive and tyrannical would become more democratic because they would want to join the world of free and peaceful democratic trading nations. Yet China, if anything, is more oppressive today than it was a few decades ago. Still communist, for example. Globalist free trade also promised that unskilled workers in poor countries would grow into a robust middle class. That has not happened either. There's famous examples in China of slave labor in other countries to this day. Now, the globalists admitted that U.S. manufacturings would leave, but that American citizens would have robust opportunities in the knowledge economy, and it would raise the standard of living for all. Well, that also, again, is not true. I discussed this. I discussed this in last week's show. I grew up in a small town in Missouri. I haven't forgotten my small town roots. Granted, today I'm in what they consider the laptop class or the knowledge class, but I haven't forgotten where I came from. And I know many people that are still in that economy, in that environment. Recently, I caught back up with a old college friend of mine who works in manufacturing. He did so then, and decades later, he still does today. He helps manufacture boats, pleasure boats, for example. The communities outside of the coastal cities and a few pockets of major cities, for the most part, are struggling. Their economies and opportunities are their economies are struggling. Their opportunities are limited. Many of them are a hollow shell of what they once were. You see, not everyone wants to learn how to code. That was the famous statement for decades. They lose their manufacturing jobs, but they'll learn how to code. Well, there's many people that have no inclination for that, nor do they desire that, nor would they likely be very good at it. As a result, it's devastated half the citizens of our country. Yet many in the major cities along the coasts, and Washington in particular, frankly didn't care very much, really didn't pay much attention to. Called them flyover country in a derogatory statement. Yet there are fellow Americans, there are fellow citizens. Most of them are good, decent, hardworking people who just want to have an opportunity of a good life, raise their families, live in a safe community, enjoy a few pleasures in life, maybe a vacation here or there, and a comfortable retirement. They just want to live in peace. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the promise in the Declaration of Independence. Yet since the mid-90s, particularly after NAFTA was signed, much of that was decimated. Millions of manufacturing jobs disappeared. These four assumptions by the elites that globalist free trade would provide were horribly and badly wrong. They were dead wrong. The results speak for themselves. So if anybody has a problem with trying to fix the system and they're still listening to the elites who were dead wrong on this, I would say, why are you still listening to them? It's time for a reset, for a change, and that's what we're seeing happening. Now on the show, I'm going to share some more updates on the trade policy and what's happening, what's likely to happen, how to navigate this period of transition, certainly a lot of volatility. Your personal bank can help eliminate much of that for you. And if you want more information, certainly contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the next segment. I think you're going to find it quite interesting.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So I was discussing in the previous segment a lot of how we got here and really what the trade or tariff policies are really about. And again, a big part of it is truly about fair trade versus free trade, bringing about a truly fair system of trade between countries, and bringing manufacturing back to the United States for job opportunities and national security reasons. And see, our global elites who were selling us on this globalist free trade and had been doing so for decades made tons of promises that fair trade would be honored by all nations and it would bring prosperity to nations across the world and that there'd be robust opportunities in the new economy for everyone in America. Well, all those things were terribly, terribly wrong. And what's really sad is, and frustrating about many of our elites are, despite the fact that they were so horribly wrong in what they were proposing and promoting to us in terms of free trade, yet most have been unwilling to admit that they were wrong. They keep doubling down and keep attacking the efforts made by the Trump administration to address this and adjust and fix the problem once and for all. It leads me to believe one of two things. Either these globalist elites really, truly are not very intelligent, because the mark of true intelligence is the ability to learn new things and the ability to admit when you were wrong. And yet I've heard very little of that. Or I think the more likely scenario here is they were benefiting from the system and they saw benefit for themselves, so they're promoting that so that they can benefit. The heck with everyone else. If they benefit and other people suffer, whatever. It's heartless, it's cruel, but I think unfortunately that's probably closer to the truth. And the key point is because of the deliberate policies that our government has pursued over the last 30 to 40 years, as I stated earlier, cannot produce the things that we need, like food, energy, fertilizer, clothing, computers, vehicles, just about everything. Yet the architects of these policies to this day will look you dead in the eye and tell you it's actually good to be forced to rely on your enemies for everything you need to survive. Many of them have gotten rich due to this system, and I believe that's the primary motivation of why they've been promoting it so strongly for so long. It's not much different than the warmongers, the military industrial complex that prefers war, these endless wars. They profit from it. It's no different than the people that have been really pushing the green energy so strongly. Many of them are profiting from it. I get to ask this all the time. How do you come up with some of these things? How do you realize or figure this out? Part of it's using some intelligence, thinking things through, use some common sense, added sprinkled in with a little experience. But the last thing I would say is if the most important and key item to try to figure out why something is the way it really is you have to follow the money. What's the monetary benefit of this? And if you can determine how someone or an organization or a country benefits financially as a result of a certain agenda or proposition or policy or anything for that matter, it truly helps you understand why things are the way they are, why these people promote what they do. And as I would say, the stronger, the harder somebody promotes something, despite the facts that are clearly in their face, just demonstrates how much they're benefiting financially as a result. And oftentimes, when that financial benefit is threatened, they tend to howl loudest because they're trying to protect the money that they're getting from this. So if someone becomes more adamant, more audacious, and even outrageous, despite the facts, that leads me to believe, okay, where's the money connection? That's the question I ask. I don't take it at their face value, particularly when talking about people like politicians, bureaucrats. I've often been shocked when I would ask them why you did this or that, particularly like use an example of COVID. Why did you take the shot? Well, the CDC said this or the government said that. In my opinion, that's the reason to not trust them. Look at their track record, look at the history. Our federal government, CDC, and those organizations have been involved in testing subjects for decades without their knowledge. The Black community has a well documented history of our federal government testing subjects without their consent or knowledge, and they have a healthy distrust of that. I agree with them. In fact, I often say I trust a politician or bureaucrat less than a slimy used car salesman. Because at least with the slimy used car salesman, I understand their motivation. They want to unload this lousy car, this lemon, and try to make a commission. I can understand that. The bureaucrat or the politician, their motivations sometimes are not as obvious, but you can pretty much count on one thing, and that is a politician in particular has two real priorities in life for the most part. One is to get elected, and the second is to get reelected. All other priorities fall far below those first two. And that's not me saying that. That comes directly from Thomas Sowell. Now, if you were sick and you had a tumor, if you suddenly learned that you had a tumor and you needed surgery to stay alive, what would you do? If you had a heart attack and the doctor says we need to do heart surgery or you're not going to make it, what would you do? If you're walking down the street and you got shot and the paramedics rush you to the emergency room and the emergency room doctor says we need to operate immediately or you're going to die, what would you do? Well, the answer is obvious. You would go through the surgery, understanding that the experience would be traumatic short term. But you would go through the process and the pain and the recovery so that you could survive long term. And the reality is, tariff policy, the economic policy, the fair trade versus free trade, the changes that the Trump administration is implementing is exactly that. They've said themselves, there's going to be some short term pain. Obviously, we're experiencing tremendous volatility in the stock markets, for example. This is the short term pain part of the process. Our country's very sick financially. If we don't do something, its heart's going to stop. It's going to die. It's going to go bankrupt. We got to put the paddles on. We're in the emergency room. And what Trump is trying to do is shock the economy back into the right direction so that we can not only survive, but actually thrive in the long term. So I find it amazing these people that are freaking out about the markets in particular, going up and down and whatever. The short term views of many people are truly shocking. Yes, I understand they've gotten used to things being almost on, like one client told me, cruise control for the last decade plus. Well, understand the reason behind that. The Federal Reserve, for the longest time, had low interest rates, ultra low rates. They're pumping money into the system. In the past, so a combination of really low interest rates and even after raising those rates, still oftentimes pumping liquidity, money into the system. For example, the last 4 years, 40% of all the money that's ever been printed in existence was printed in the past 4 years. They increase the money supply tremendously, which means the cost of things go up accordingly. It's like a sugar high. The stock market, the real estate market, any asset market you want to look at has been running on a sugar high or an artificial money printing high. And it's like a person who's eating too much sugar or an alcoholic. When they stop eating that sugar or stop drinking the booze, what happens? There's a shock to the system. It's traumatic, but it has to be done. Thankfully, there's many people that understand that. But the folks that are freaking out and are surprised just have not been paying attention and probably don't really understand why things are going the way they're going. And if they are freaking out so much about the ups and downs of the markets and they can't handle the ride, probably should get off. Psychological studies show that about 80% of human beings are risk adverse. The stock market is the opposite of that. There is significant risk involved. We are seeing that through volatility currently. Now, generally, in the long run, it does go up. I agree. But you're going to have significant adjustments, volatility at various times in the meantime. One of those we're currently in. Warren Buffett has famously stated, if you're not willing to lose half your money and not touch it for 5 or 10 years, you probably shouldn't invest. He's correct. I'm paraphrasing. My point is this, from a psychological standpoint, many people are far more invested in the markets, the stock markets in particular, than they probably should be from a psychological standpoint. And the question you have to ask yourself is, which is more important? Granted, making more money is always a nice thing, but but emotionally, is that how you want to live your life if it's something that really stresses you out? Particularly as you near retirement or get into retirement, a question I often ask people is, what kind of life do you want to live? And when it comes to your money, what do you want your money to do for you? Most answer with steady, consistent growth. That's why your personal bank, annuities, guaranteed income riders are so popular for folks nearing or in retirement. It's also quite popular for folks that are younger who psychologically understand they just can't stomach the ups and downs, particularly of what been seeing lately. It's a quality of life issue is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a dollars and cents thing. And one good question often to ask is, if your accounts lost 20% in the next week or month, which certainly they could do, would that bother you? Would that concern you? Would you lose a little sleep at night? That's a great little measure or measuring tool to determine, are you invested properly for what's known in our industry as your risk tolerance. You have to do what works for you, not what everybody else is telling you to do, but what works for you. And if you want more assistance on that or advice, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I'll be happy to help you with that. Maybe get yourself in more of a balance of what fits you, your personality, your lifestyle, your goals, where you want to be financially going forward. Stay tuned in the next segment. I got some more fun stuff to share about tariffs in our system, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So the recent volatility in the stock markets has gotten a lot of people shaken up. It's gotten their attention. It's been stomach churning for those that are paying attention to it. And a lot of it has to do with the tariffs, the rules, what's going on, the changes. But one of the things I really like about what Trump is doing in terms of tariff policy, economic policy in general, is they're really questioning everything. They're really looking at what has not worked and how we could change it. Free trade has not worked for the United States in many respects. It's devastated our middle class. It's had devastating effects in our ability to manufacture and make things. We as a country cannot even support our own citizens on many of the necessary things we need, everything from computer chips to run our fighter jets to antibiotics. So it's become a national security issue. It's hollowed out many of the small towns and rural areas of much of the country. They're a hollow shell of what they used to be. They really lack opportunity. But some of the other questions that have come up, this was from Stephen Miller. I love this one. He's Trump advisor, stating the original sin was that we created a tax system that punished you for making something in America and rewarded you for making something in China. Now, why would we do that? Well, it's probably pretty clearly obvious if you follow the money that many of the politicians and bureaucrats that were making these rules, frankly, benefited from these rules, legally or otherwise, by benefiting manufacturing going to China, for example, versus the United States. And he also went on and made a fundamental question, and I thought this was great. He said, who should have priority access to the U.S. market? That's really the big question. Should it be the factory that's located in Cleveland or the factory that's located in Beijing? It's a very good point he's making. And Scott Bessent, our current Treasury Secretary, I've got to admit, the more I listen to him, the more I like this guy. He seems to have a real solid grasp, as he puts it, on what's really going on and what's really important for this country. He recently had a big speech in front of a large number of bankers. And to his credit, he stated, hey, the policies that our government has pursued for the last several decades has clearly benefited large banks and been to the detriment of small banks and businesses. And he said those days are over. It's Main Street's term now, as he put it, not Wall Street. He said Wall Street will be fine. And this is a guy from Wall Street. Now, he grew up middle class, and I think you see, and he hasn't forgotten his middle class roots. And I've shared some of that story myself personally. I think you find that sort of as a common refrain when you see some of these people who maybe have been very successful, yet came from humble beginnings and are humble enough to remember what it's like, probably still have family members many times, as I do, or friends that are still in that economic reality of where we grew up, and you don't forget. And Scott Bessent pointed out in a recent interview I thought was amazing. He said the top 10% own 88% of all stocks, and the next 40% own basically the rest, the other 12%. The bottom 50% of Americans have debt. They're not in the stock market. So these recent gyrations that are happening in the stock market are really only affecting, for the most part, the top 10% of Americans. It's not affecting the average American because the average American has little or no stake in the game. They don't own a whole lot of stocks. The average American, you take a middle class family from just about anywhere in this country, they're not, like Scott Bessent stated, they don't care about what's going on in Madison Avenue or the latest hot restaurant in Paris. They just want to have a safe community to live in. They want to raise their family. They want to have a decent job or business that they can make a reasonable living. They're not afraid of working hard. They just want to have an opportunity. They want to have some simple enjoyments, maybe a vacation or something, and they want to be able to retire comfortably. And that was the American dream. It wasn't that long ago that a typical American family on one income could do all those things. That's not true today. And what's happened is many elites are frankly out of touch with average Americans. I love this quote from Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He said when he was a big bond trader, he said a bad day for many of his clients. They'd be upset. They were having all these frustrations because their net jet was late today. That was their source of frustration and concern. They're completely out of touch of the average American. And we've seen a bifurcation of our economy, two different groups of people. Part of the reason why we're so divided politically, by the way. And the reality is, as I stated earlier, we should be thankful that Trump is willing to rip the Band-Aid off and try to fix this problem because we have 36 trillion in debt. We have a stock market that's been artificially high because of excess money printing. It's a sugar high. It's fake. You can say a lot about the real estate market too, any asset for that matter. And there really is no other option than fixing the actual problem, because to not do so, we were careening off a fiscal cliff to bankruptcy. It was unsustainable. Here's another fact, too, as I was stating, that's a sad reality of middle America today. It's been reported that in 2024, more Americans were using food banks than at any time ever previous in history. And oftentimes, the food banks were reporting the normal people that come, they normally take care of. They were seeing folks they'd never seen before. Oftentimes, these were people that had jobs. They were working. Some of them had more than one job. The problem was inflation had caused the price of food and other things to go up so much that they would go to the grocery store and not be able to purchase all the items they needed to feed their family. So they would then go to the food bank to supplement what they couldn't afford to buy. These are Americans who are working, who have jobs, the working poor. We've heard that term. There's an entire region of our country known as the Rust Belt. You know what I'm talking about. It's not called the Rust Belt because it's thriving. It's called the Rust Belt because it's decaying. It's rusting away. And that's an entire region that used to be a manufacturing powerhouse of the world. Yet it's been ignored and decimated for decades. Again, a lot of people are scared about the tariffs. Initially, I was hesitant about them too, because in general, if you get into a tariff war, the cost of things certainly would go up. But again, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, in another interview, he's been everywhere, shared some very valuable information. He stated that in Trump's first term, he put a 20% tariff on China. The actual results were that there was a 0.7% increase in prices over a 4-year period. And that was less than 1%. So a 20% tariff on China resulted in less than 1% increase in prices over a 4-year period. That's pretty darn good when you consider in the Biden administration, we had about a 30% increase in prices overall over that same 4-year period due to extra government spending, high energy prices, and all that. Scott Besson also pointed out that oil prices have been coming down. And that's part of the reason, as I stated at the beginning of this show, that the March inflation numbers have reduced to 2.4% annualized. Again, these are the government numbers, so they're still a little bit muted from what's reality. But those numbers are far closer to the target level of 2% the Federal Reserve states that they want. And a reduction in oil prices impacts average Americans far more than the stock market does. Again, the top 10% of Americans own 88% of the stocks. But if you reduce energy prices, that positively impacts everyone, and particularly the lower and middle income Americans, because their costs of purchasing items and fuel go down, or at least stop going up so much. Now, I hesitate to share a lot about this because it's been such a fast moving target. But recently, Trump has announced a 10% flat tariff across the board on all countries and a 125% tariff on China. Now, why did he do that? It's really quite simple. And if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, you would understand. He raised tariffs on everyone across the board, told them not to retaliate, because he was really looking to determine who really wanted to work with us and be our allies, or trading partners at least, and those that weren't. For the most part, every country did not retaliate, except China did. They raised their tariffs a retaliatory 34%. So Trump turned around and raised it 125%. Now that negatively impacts China far more than the United States. And the reason is quite simple. China exports to the U.S. about 5 times more goods than the U.S. exports to China. It's about a 5-to-1 ratio. So if tariffs go up on both countries, which at this point in time they have, it affects China far more.
Is show you how to enhance it through perhaps positive arbitrage with the personal bank policy to increase your rate of return, or your profit, I should say, by 10, 20% even. Look, if you're making a 10% return profit on an investment you're doing, whatever that may be, if you increased it to 12%, you just increased your profit by 20%. Take any business out there in this world and you tell them, I can show you how to increase your profits, the bottom line, the top line number, profit number, by 20%. They're going to be dancing in the street. That's the type of thing we do. That's what I do with clients, teaching them how to make their money work for them more efficiently than it is now. Not just put it somewhere and, set it and forget it or hope it works out or whatever. And the last thing I want to share, again, is a very common financial literacy concept or mistake that many, many people make is they start comparing rates of return, asking the question is, should they do this or that? You're asking the wrong question when you do that. You're dealing with the wrong premise. What you should be looking at is, how can I do this and that? So if you have an investment you like, great. You could continue doing it or add a step. Put it in a personal bank policy, for example. Then borrow against it, receive positive arbitrage. The historical positive arbitrage for the last 40 plus years is about 2%. If you put it in the policy, borrow against it, and then invest in that asset, you now increase your profit rate of return by a couple of percent. Now, again, that's a big deal. If you're getting a 10% ROI, return on investment, you're now getting 12 historically on average. That's a 20% increase on returns. That's what your personal bank can do. These other tools, again, can accomplish other things like guaranteed lifetime income or reduce market risk or whatever, or reduce your taxes. There's a number of other tools. Like I said, we have a whole tool bag available of different tools that can accomplish different goals that you may have. And one or more of those may be a great fit for you, and you perhaps may not even realize it. If you want more information, of course, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to now really dive into some government waste and taxes, so you don't want to miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. And just a quick aside, the volatility in the stock market has caused a lot of people to reach out to me because I do specialize in guaranteed fixed, highly liquid, tax-free assets. Someone were calling, I heard you talk on the radio about this. Do you still have it available? Yes. Not only do I still have it available, but at some of the best numbers, returns, dividends, all that I've seen in over 40 years. It's a golden age of fixed assets. So if you want to reduce some of your market volatility in your investments, I'm probably the guy you should be talking to, and you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Why are so many business owners excited about this trade negotiation with China? A lot of it has to do with the way China goes about doing business and trade. Basically, they just don't follow the rules for the most part. They cheat. They do whatever they need to do to get ahead. And I've heard multiple stories to this effect where a company will produce a product. That product does well. The company grows. As it grows, it realizes it needs to reduce the cost of manufacturing. Clearly, one of the choices is China because the cost of manufacturing is far lower there. China's been accused of even providing slave labor wages, but they go there to reduce their cost of manufacturing, which makes sense. The problem is China requires these companies oftentimes to give them their molds or patents or whatever it is they have so they can produce their products for them. And oftentimes what ends up happening is they'll produce the product this company is offering during the day in their manufacture facilities, for example. Then at night, they'll produce the same product, but then sell them as cheap knockoffs, oftentimes about 30% less, imported into the United States through various online portals. And so now you can purchase the product, this exact same product this company, maybe they created, invented, or just found a better way. But now they're selling the same product at 30% less and they cut that company out. The one that created the product or brought it to the marketplace in the first place. Now, if that company wants to fight or go to court, they don't have any access to Chinese court system. Obviously, a Chinese company can go in the US court system and sue or whatever. They have that right, but they don't offer the same rights to US citizens. Again, not a fair system. They're also famous for stealing IT and technology. China is also famous for subsidizing various products and dumping them cheaply into the U.S. economy. Steel being one of those famous examples because China wants to dominate the world steel market. Why? Steel is a very valuable commodity, particularly when you're building weapons of war like ships and planes. If you don't have the capacity to build, you're at a national security disadvantage. China understands that. So these are all the types of things that the Trump administration is looking at in terms of negotiating a fair trade deal. So it's more than just, hey, we're going to charge this level of tariff or not. We're going to charge each other 10% or whatever the number turns out to be. It's about all these other things, technology theft, counterfeit products, currency manipulation, fairness of a company if it's going to do business there, that it has the right to have legal representation and represent its rights, for example. All these types of things. Now, will China come to the table and do all this? At this point, that is unknown. But one of the other advantages, the smart things that the Trump administration has done, is in essence, many of the countries that were doing business with China were forced to choose. The Trump administration put a tariff out on everybody, said don't retaliate, and in essence said, do you want to work with us or not? These countries, in essence, had to decide, do we want to work with the U.S. or China? And for the most part, nearly all of them chose the U.S. So now there are countries that have had working relationships with China. The reports are they are not taking China's calls, so to speak, because they don't want to interfere or jeopardize the good relationship they have with the U.S. What Trump has done is he's, in his essence, forced countries and companies to make a choice. Who do you want to work with? This is isolating China, and it's exposed through their actions the bad actors that they really are on trade. This is going to make other countries and companies be less likely to want to do business with them in the future. If China decides to fight this economic battle, one, they're at a significant strategic disadvantage in that they produce 5 times more products export to the U.S. than the U.S. exports to China. So that's a massive disadvantage on their part. Any tariff is going to cost them far more than it'll cost the U.S. Their main advantage is their ability to manufacture products cheaper, but with a 10% across the board tariff on everything, in some cases that offsets the cost of labor. So now the advantage to manufacturing in another country is certainly less so. If a certain product still is cheaper to produce overseas and bring to the United States, there are other countries that are good trading partners of ours with low labor costs, like Vietnam, for example, and others. So there are other options that are available and open to these countries or to these companies that want to produce products overseas and bring them in and pay the tariff. So it really does look like China is not holding very many cards in this economic scenario, the trade scenario, and all that. And one other thing is their economy is really struggling right now. So it's happening at a particularly bad time for China. For instance, they overbuilt on their real estate dramatically so. Many of you remember that the United States overbuilt houses, and part of the reason why we had the issue in 08, 09, but they did it to a level dramatically higher than the United States. But there's a few other key points. So we're going to keep a close eye on this. Again, everybody I talk to is asking me about the tariffs and the trade and all that. I think the one thing we can say for sure, continued volatility until we figure out it's in China's hands. How long are they going to fight this fight? What are they going to do? And we're going to see significant volatility until the dust settles and a real deal is settled on. And it's unknown at this point how long that's going to take. There's one other part of the economic policy, the Trump economic policy, that's important, and that's getting rid of waste and fraud and regulations and all that, reducing the size and cost of government. And the amount of fraud is just almost beyond belief. According to the Social Security Administration, in fiscal year 2001, over 270 non-citizens received Social Security numbers. In 2022, that number was 590,000. In 23, almost a million. And in 2024, over 2 million non-citizens received Social Security numbers. Now, this allows them the ability to receive Social Security, Medicare benefits, and even vote. It's now been documented that about 1.3 million non-citizens are receiving Medicare currently. Unknown how many are receiving Social Security at this point, and it's been proven some did vote. They're not even citizens. We've discussed on the show a number of times in the Social Security and Medicare trustee reports stating that the benefits would be reduced in the next 7 or 8 years because of the amount of funds available in the system. Well, it turns out that the waste and fraud and the non-citizens receiving the benefits have been draining the system faster than it should be. Now, how did they get Social Security numbers? Well, it turns out that they just mailed them to them. About 4 million Social Security numbers have been mailed to non-citizens. No interview, no ID check, nothing. They just gave them to them. But it even gets worse. It turns out FHA had a program to pay for illegal immigrants to get mortgages. Apparently, the average mortgage, taxpayer-funded loans, were $186,000. As many of these illegal aliens signed up for this on an app, were flown into the country, given Social Security numbers, allowed to work, got mortgages for their homes, many received Social Security and Medicare benefits. And it's also been reported that the Biden administration was paying for over 1 million illegal immigrant homes. Doge has reported that they have uncovered over $5 trillion in untraceable payments. These are checks that have gone out with no reporting, no reason, untraceable. Over $5 trillion. That's almost how much money our federal government spends in an entire year. Now, these numbers are incredibly shocking. Frankly, they're almost hard to believe. But here's the good news. They're being discovered. They're being shut down. They're being addressed. And as that continues to happen, more and more of this fraud, waste, abuse, and frankly, just illegal activity will be eliminated. The amount of fraud and waste and abuse and illegal activity financially that's been found already, and I assure you, I'm sure it's not all of it, it's just what's been found so far. Imagine, if you will, for a minute, how strong our economy would really be if much of this was eliminated. It's really shocking that our economy operated as well as it did, and we're still the strongest economy in the world with all this fraud and waste, abuse, and criminality. Imagine getting rid of a lot of it. When Trump says we could be in a golden era, he means it, and the numbers bear that out. I hope and pray that they are successful and continue to be successful in what they're doing. I'm very bullish on the long-term prospects of America and our economy in the long term, but there will be some significant and even extreme volatility in the meantime. And that could last a while. It's impossible to know how long. If you want to protect yourself from that, you can do so with your personal bank, annuities, guaranteed income riders. It's a golden era of fixed assets. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com for more information. Stay tuned next week to the Your Personal Bank Show for more great information. And as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.